Hi, everyone, and welcome to my show called We Were Lied to About 9/11. I am your host, John Gold, and this show is part of the Soapbox People's Network. This week, we're going to focus on whether or not there were indications of foreknowledge of the attacks in the financial markets and industry.
Hi, this is John and Bill Bergman. Hi, Bill. How are you doing tonight?
Good, John. Thanks. Nice to be here.
Good to have you. Alrighty, I'm going to read your bio for everyone. Bill Bergman is the Director of Research for Truth in Accounting, a Chicago-based nonprofit dedicated to informing citizens about government financial reporting. He also teaches finance and economics and finance courses at Loyola University Chicago. He has over 20 years of financial market experience, including 13 years as an economist and financial market policy analyst at the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. His research interests have included wholesale payment system risk and pricing, the role of credit ratings in financial markets, the implications that national emergency and war powers can have for the executive branch in a time of crisis, and financial reporting by local, state, and federal government entities. He is married with three kids. Okay, so that's your bio. Is there anything you wanted to add to that, or
we've had about 55 years of experience, and that's when I was born. But I guess we can go on from there and work more directly on these questions.
Okay.
Appreciate your interest, John, and your work in the past in this area.
Oh, thank you very much, Bill. All right, just so everyone knows, before we get started in our interview, something happened this week that I think deserves attention, and I wrote a little recap of this week's events about Saudi Arabia and 9/11, so I'd like to read that for everybody. Bill, if you can give me a second.
Sure, no problem.
All right, good. This week, Obama canceled a trip to the Taj Mahal so he could go pay his respects for King Abdullah in Saudi Arabia. He went to see the new king, Salman bin Abdulaziz Al Saud, who just happens to be named as a defendant in a lawsuit against Saudi Arabia brought about by 9/11 families. Some of the people that accompanied him were John McCain, who loves the 9/11 report, which absolved the Saudi Arabian government. James A. Baker, his law firm, Baker Botts, represented the Saudis against the 9/11 families in a lawsuit, and Condoleezza Rice, who lied before the 9/11 Commission and had an oil rig named after her. Michael Smerconish asked White House Chief of Staff Dennis McDonough about the 28 redacted pages of the Joint Congressional Inquiry into 9/11, something the families have been fighting for the release of for years. And he said, quote, "Well, this is obviously an issue that you have been working on for some time, and this goes back across administrations. The president will be visiting Riyadh to express our condolences and to underscore the important issues that we have going on in the region. I'm not going to get involved in the 28 pages now, Michael, any more than I did before," end quote. After arriving in Riyadh, Obama defended the U.S.'s relationship with Saudi Arabia considering their human rights issues by saying that, quote, "Sometimes we need to balance our need to speak to them about human rights issues with immediate concerns we have in terms of counterterrorism or dealing with regional stability," end quote. Deputy National Security Advisor Ben Rhodes said, quote, "We do believe that Saudi policy will remain quite similar to how it's been under King Abdullah," end quote. He said, adding, Obama wanted to forge the same kind of, quote, "close relationship," end quote, with Salman as he had with his predecessor. Former President George H.W. Bush praised Saudi Arabia's alliance with the U.S. after Iraq's invasion of Kuwait in 1990, an invasion that led to the first Gulf War, calling Abdullah a, quote, "dear friend and partner," end quote. The first President Bush said he would, quote, "never forget the way Saudi Arabia and the United States stood together against a common foe, marking an marking a moment of unparalleled cooperation between two great nations, end quote. Bush's son, former President George W. Bush, called the king, quote, an important ally, or an important and able ally and a force for modernization in his country, end quote. The last thing, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, because of Abdullah's death, has established a research and essay competition in honor of Saudi Arabia's King Abdullah bin Abdul Aziz, hosted by the National Defense University. The competition will focus on issues related to the Arab-Muslim world and is designed to encourage strategic thinking and meaningful research on a crucial part of the world. The program will be in place at NDU for the next academic year, officials said. So that's what happened in the last week. Do you have anything to say about this?
Well, I guess I do, John, and more than one thing to say about it. But going forward here in our conversation, I'd also like to note that I'm speaking on behalf of Bill Bergman, not on the part of any of the organizations that I'm currently working with. I care about the issues that you care about because I think we both care about them because we're citizens, and so that's where I'm coming from here. Yeah, I guess this latest news is helping to underscore the fact that the questions we're going to be exploring are not only still open, but behind the scenes there, I think some legal avenues things are intensifying and possibly moving in a direction towards greater disclosure that we're going to appreciate. And so that, we're not just talking about something that happened 13 years ago. We're talking about things that are current and timely and possibly getting more attention.
Yep, absolutely. And to me, what happened was just a big slap in the face to all of the 9/11 family members. Remember now that Obama promised 9/11 family members, Kristen Breitweiser and Bill Doyle, that he would release the 28 redacted pages of the Joint Congressional Inquiry, and has yet to do so. Mm-hmm. So, if you want to hear about Saudi Arabia's role or possible role in the 9/11 attacks, I suggest listening to my interview with Paul Church.
Mm-hmm.
Alrighty, so we're going to get started now with the questions for you. First question is, what was the day of 9/11 like for you?
Well, one of the things about that day was the fact that I was already on pins and needles because my first son was about to be born, and I was going to work, and that's actually part of the story. When the news of 9/11 arrived, I first heard about the events when a former intern called me up at work and said, "Hey, are you watching this?" And I had no clue what was happening, and then I heard what was happening, and it was what a day. But with my son was about to be born, the first thing I thought of, and then I went home immediately and left the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago and went home because I didn't know where the trains were going to be moving, and he could have been born at any moment. I didn't know if it was going to be a boy or a girl, by the way, and it was my first boy. That was about 5 days later. But that was my priority, was getting home to my family, in part because the other phone call that I received about an hour after that first one was from my sister, Laura, who in 1985, I believe, she was on board TWA Flight 847, the one that was hijacked and a Navy diver was killed on the flight. She made it through, and I still remember getting a call from the State Department telling us she was safe before I knew she was even on the flight. And she called up about an hour after that first phone call and said, "Get out of there." So I did, and later on, anyway, some people decided they had to stay at their post, and my job was not like that. I was in a research role, and I didn't really I could have stuck around and stayed by the fort, but my priorities were going home, and that's what I did.
Well, that makes sense, and congratulations on your firstborn son.
Yeah, it was exciting. Mr. Bergman, that's a big baby. That was the first thing that came out of the nurse's mouth, and I know that you're a big boy, but so is he, and he's doing good.
Yeah, I'm a big boy at 6'3", probably over 300 pounds at this point. Anyway, what was the first thing you questioned about 9/11?
Well, I think maybe the first day on the train back to work, I remember talking to a friend, and one of the things that was in my head was we must have known something was coming, and I said that out of my mouth, that we had to know. Somehow the intelligence agencies had to know something was up, and I didn't know for sure, but that was my first premonition. In turn, I don't know, the communication that we were getting from our government at the time, it certainly didn't feel dishonest, but it didn't feel coherent or reliable, especially regarding the response, the defense response to the planes going off course. Something just didn't feel coherent or right, and that was my my first feelings about the events. When we invaded Afghanistan, I'm kind of a peacenik, and I almost felt like it was, well, I can't really attack this. You've got to go find the criminals and take care of them. And now we've learned a great deal more, I think, about the questions underlying whether or not that was a valid response. But that was my feeling at the time. But if I was to try to identify any one point in time when I felt like there was a need to aggressively try to find the truth as opposed to what we were being told about the truth, was when Henry Kissinger was named the first commissioner, and that didn't sound right. And that was when I said something in my head, this isn't, and that's when I first started trying to think creatively and honestly about the questions that are still open today.
Well, that's interesting that you pointed out, or you questioned having a foreknowledge of the events within the intelligence community, because after 9/11, we were told repeatedly that there were no warnings, that nobody had any idea that this kind of thing could happen, over and over again, and that it was a surprise attack like Pearl Harbor was presented, and so on and so forth. We heard that over and over and over again. And I quickly, to get into my story a little bit, the very first thing that really stuck out to me was when Bush and Cheney asked Daschle not to investigate the attacks of 9/11 in January of 2002. And I thought, why would the president and vice president, of all people, not want to know exactly how and why this happened, so as to make sure it could never happen again? And then in May 2002, news of the August 6th PDB came out, which talked about warnings and so forth. And as I said, we were told repeatedly that there were no warnings. So when the August 6th PDB came out, and I realized we were being lied to, and the president and vice president didn't want to investigate this, I was off to the races. As far as invading Afghanistan, that was sold as the good war. Like you said, we have to go after these guys who did this. And that was acceptable to people. But, today, I look at it as, the individuals responsible needed to be held accountable. We shouldn't have held an entire country accountable for the actions of a few.
And the many innocent deaths that have arisen both in Iraq and Afghanistan are very, very sad. Responsibility.
Yeah,
and we are, as citizens, we are responsible for this happening, and it's a sad state of affairs.
There was a poll that came out a while ago that said that 95% of the people in Afghanistan have never even heard of the 9/11 attacks, and we were indiscriminately bombing so many people, and it's just horrible. Anyway, all right, now what I'm going to do. The next question is, I'm just going to let you tell your story. So please tell us your story. And when you use big words like M1 aggregate, please explain what it is for the dumb folks, such as myself, who are not financial whizzes.
Sure, that sounds, I can do that, I think. As a teacher, that's what I try to do, and we'll go from there. I guess in thinking about quote my story unquote, one of the early parts of the story, in fact, is relevant, and it was before 9/11, and that was in August 2001. I was about 80% complete with a paper analyzing what happens during a national emergency or a time of war and by national emergency, I'm talking about a presidentially declared national emergency, a very interesting area of constitutional law with important financial market implications. For instance, the March 1933 bank holiday declared by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt during a banking crisis was asserted to be under the authority of something called the Trading with the Enemy Act of 1917. That during a time of crisis, the president can do extraordinary things, and he ordered all the banks in the country to be closed because of the run on the banking system. And this one order had a force of law, and all the banks in the country closed because one person decided that was the. And whether or not that kind of authority, in our constitutional system, we have a shared set of responsibilities between the Congress and the executive branch and the judicial branch, and it's a very, very interesting area. And the new administration, I was sensing their in 2001 their tendencies in the areas of military affairs as well as executive branch authority. They're very aggressive view of the scope and authority for the president and the executive branch. That was something called the unitary executive theory was developed within the administration to justify more or less the president deciding what is or isn't the right thing to do without being checked or balanced by the Congress. We're in charge here is more like an oversimplification of that unitary executive theory. And in turn, that has implications for during a crisis, financial crisis or otherwise, for the independence of the Federal Reserve System and decision-making within the Federal Reserve during a time of crisis. So it seemed to be an interesting and unique original sort of contribution that I was working on. And I got about 2 weeks before 9/11, I got a call from Louis Fisher, a wonderful constitutional law scholar, who, among other things, has done a great book on the state secrets privilege, which you're aware of in the case of Sibel Edmonds, I think.
Yes.
But a longer story there. And then, 2 weeks later, we got the real national emergency, and in turn, in November 2001, I presented that paper at the Library of Congress, and I felt like I was just helpful, at least in trying to open people's eyes. I wasn't an expert in this area, but it was a contribution, and so that was part of my story, because after working in the areas of financial market policy analysis that I was working in for about 3 years after 9/11, and 2 years after 9/11, in late 2003, I was invited to present that national emergency paper at an accounting conference because of the accounting implications, and I had received the Best Manuscript Award at this accounting conference the year before. And it was thank you. But that's, not, for the moment, the reason that it's relevant is the fact that I was told that I wouldn't be presenting the paper. You're not going to be presenting a paper on national emergency powers. And at that point, I was also invited to work in the money laundering area, which was in a different part of the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago within the Supervision and Regulation Department. And among other things, I went through an FBI background check and survived and got some credentials for, confidential information handling, and signed a non-disclosure agreement, and started working. And I was told I was part of the fight on terrorism at that time. And not knowing much about money laundering, I was asked at the time to try to develop a reference document for the Federal Reserve System. And I didn't have a great deal of background in money laundering, so the first thing I did try to write was a primer on money laundering. And as I did this primer, I was looking at some things relating to, if we should look at money flows around 9/11, if we can learn anything from them, and also apply those lessons in the future to look for things to watch. And so that's what I did. I started scouring the world for both the external and public information that's out there, as well as the internal data that I was looking at when I was in the Fed. And I saw two things that perked my attention. The fact that in July and August 2001, there was an extraordinary surge in currency circulating outside of banks. That's the currency component of the M1 aggregate that you mentioned. There's two basic types of cash. You've got cash in a bank in the form of bank deposits and checking deposits, for instance. And in turn, you have currency circulating outside of banks. If you go to an ATM tomorrow and withdraw $100 from your checking account, the overall M1 number won't change, but the demand deposit number will go down and the currency circulating outside of banks will go up because you withdrew money from your account. And it's that number, the currency circulating outside of banks, in the billions of dollars was the amount of the above normal amount. August 2001 was, at the time I looked at it, was the third fastest growing month in currency circulating outside of banks since World War II. There were only 2 other months out of the 700 months or so that we've had. So you have 3 and those 2 other months are of interest. One was December 1999, which makes some sense in the sense of the Y2K phenomenon. People were concerned about banks and were unloading current, taking some people were so concerned about banks in the Y2K interval that they were withdrawing currency. But the other relevant factoid that may just be a coincidence about that December 1999, that was the biggest increase of all the 700 months, was the fact that we were under, the millennium terrorism threat was operating at that time too. And the main reason why this is not just perhaps a coincidence, but there's a real reason to be looking at currency circulating outside of banks in light of terrorism threats is the fact that after 9/11 and after those 98 embassy bombings in Africa, the United States and the banking regulators and the Justice Department have the authority and the ability, and they actually do freeze and seize assets in banks of suspicious parties. And if that's the case, and if you have money in a bank and you're aware of things, you have an incentive to get your money out of the banks. A longer story there relating to these Sarasota developments we can talk about later, but that was the December 1999 background. The second fastest growing month was January 1991. And 2 interesting things happening at that time, just by way of context, were the onset of U.S. military action in Iraq in the first Gulf War. And there's some interesting reasons why currency is used in military and covert operations, which are of interest there perhaps. In addition, that was an important enforcement month in the BCCI scandal, where people were seeing apparently the Federal Reserve and the Justice Department getting more serious about cracking down in BCCI and may have been withdrawing money at that point in time. And the third fastest growing month out of those 700 months was August 2001. It wasn't September, it was August, the month before 9/11. With the possibility that suspicious parties were liquefying their accounts, either in the United States or outside the United States, because of the possibility that their assets are going to be frozen. And go ahead, sorry.
No, my question really fast is, so basically, during a time of threat or the idea that we might be going to war or that cash might become harder to get, is that what I'm understanding? They make more money available? Is that how I'm understanding it?
They make it available because people want it. And yes, that's what happens. So in order to make it available, that's an interesting point. The question is, okay, if all of a sudden there's a demand for $1 billion of $100 bills that wasn't there a week ago, how does the system meet that sort of extraordinary requirement? And that's material for the questions that we're asking. And the answer is the fact that, the banks, they have money in their vaults, but they don't want to carry too much of that stuff around. That's why the Federal Reserve exists. The basements of the Federal Reserve and the Federal Reserve banks, the 12 banks around the country, as well as the branches, which are also of interest here, they have vaults with lots of currency to feed the banking system when the need demands it. And so the other interesting thing, and in fact public data suggests that it wasn't just currency in circulation that was rising extraordinarily rapidly in August 2001. There was also an extraordinary surge of currency shipments from the Federal Reserve facilities to the banking system in order to meet that demand.
Well, that's very interesting. So is that the basic gist of what you found?
That's the basic gist, and in fact there's also, it's important to note that even today it could be completely innocently explained by a banking crisis that was flowering in Argentina. And Wills and London, looking for billions of dollars and $100 bills, may be responsible for all of this. But the one thing that we know for sure is that we haven't seen any evidence that this plausible investigation has ever been pursued, except for the fact that I was fired after asking the questions that I asked.
So you're saying that in 2004 you were fired for writing about your questions regarding the increase in currency?
That's an simplification. Again, as I mentioned, I did some interesting things that were already kind of critical, or just, I wasn't necessarily. I was trying to work for taxpayers and citizens when I was there, and sometimes I asked questions that in other areas that we could talk about. But for now, the main point is that I was writing this Q&A, and I noticed the currency shipments, and I noticed something else, the fact that the Board of Governors on August 2nd, 2001, 4 days before that August 6th PDB, the Board of Governors issued a letter to the reserve banks that was a non-routine letter urging them to scrutinize suspicious activity reports. And the letter never mentioned terrorism or its financing explicitly, so it may just be a coincidence, but this letter came kind of out of the blue, and it was urging the reserve banks to scrutinize suspicious activity reports when, ever since 1998 embassy bombings, this had been an emphasized element of suspicious activity reporting. And the 9/11 Commission kind of painted a false picture in this regard, among other places. The fact that the governments weren't really emphasizing terrorism and terrorism financing and the anti-money laundering facilities and programs, but really they were ever since 1998, and terrorism was on the radar of the suspicious activity reporting framework. So the question arose in my head whether or not heightened intelligence warnings of terrorist threats in July and August 2001 were part of that letter that was issued to the reserve banks. And I asked if that was the case. Why was this letter issued when it was issued? And I was ready to follow up with my ideas about why we needed to investigate the currency shipments. And the conversation that I had was shorter than I expected. And a week later, my assignment was terminated. I was told I committed an egregious breach of protocol in calling who I called and asking the question that I asked, even though I already been asked to answer the question internally at the Chicago Fed. And I thought I was doing the right thing, but my credentials for confidential information were taken away, and my position in the bank a month later was eliminated. At that point, I was told it had nothing to do with me personally. It was an organizational matter.
Oh, that's very convenient, I would think. Now, in the entry on historycommons.org about you, it says, quote, as the Government Accountability Project will in 2006 write, quote, the Federal Reserve's failure to date to publicly address the growth in currency in mid-2001 is conspicuous. If a benign explanation exists, or if for whatever reasons the currency growth is irrelevant, the Fed should say so publicly and explain why this is the case. A failure to do so raises troubling questions, end quote. So that's where we stand right now as far as what you found in August 2001, is that there has been no explanation, correct?
Well, we did get a letter back from a senior staff person writing, who was asked to write this letter, and his explanation was fairly short and incomplete, was my impression, and as well as other people I respect, that there was a banking crisis flowering in Argentina, and that explains it. When even if shipments to Argentina could be suspicious along these lines as well, simply that people may have been liquidating their accounts in Argentina, not just in the United States. But that's the main point is that, yeah, that's where we stand today, even today, this far into the future. especially in light of the Sarasota story as well as the 28-page initiative. My questions are still open. And if not,
Okay.
I think they're related to, if not maybe even central to the information that is being pursued right now.
Okay, so it's basically an indication of foreknowledge that something might be happening or might be coming up on the horizon. And we're going to get further into that later. Now, did you ever try to contact any of the investigations that were going on to tell them what you know?
Yes, I did. And maybe not the investigations, but members of Congress and committees in Congress. I contacted and told them, and in turn, we did contact the Board of Governors and tried to tell them what happened at the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. In addition, I sent material to some prosecutors and never heard back. So I did try to get information out. I never trusted the 9/11 Commission, and I didn't try to contact them.
Okay, so, and you found out about this in 2004, so you wouldn't have contacted the Joint Congressional Inquiry because that was done at that point.
Right, it was late 2003 when I was working on this.
So you weren't given any kind of whistleblower status or protections or anything like that?
Nope. I trust my dad. He said, no, don't go that route. And that's just my dad. Also, Tom Devine at the Government Accountability Project, a great guy who he advised me, no, the legal route is just too fraught with disaster. And so I didn't ever try to get whistleblower protection.
Okay, now the information, as I said, you're talking about suggests that there was knowledge that something was about to happen. Are you aware of the allegations of insider trading regarding the 9/11 attacks?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Now, just so people know, there are many claims that elements close to the U.S. government were aware of the attacks and used that information to make money, that elements within Al-Qaeda used their knowledge of the attacks to make money. I want to try and answer a very simple question, and that question is, was there insider trading that was done seemingly using the knowledge that the 9/11 attacks were coming? So what can you tell me about the insider trading?
Well, I can begin with my ending, and that's I think we again have open questions here that need to be investigated. I can't tell you whether or not it certainly happened. I don't know if it did. But when you look at the market prices and what was happening in the days before 9/11 and the weeks before 9/11, it certainly appears to be the case that it's consistent with the fact that informed trading was going on. It's difficult to escape that possibility. In turn, when you combine that with the treatment of the matter in the 9/11 Commission report, the 9/11 Commission report washed their hands of the matter, it looks like, way too quickly. And we couldn't find any evidence of anyone connected to Al-Qaeda that would be doing this. They had no, the possibility, of course, if there was knowledge in the intelligence community of an impending threat, you've got the possibility that this was taking place. And it's a very sad thing, but it's possible that it was happening. And we haven't seen evidence of a authoritative, honest investigation yet. That's the other part that's a little bit scary.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to read directly from my article, The Facts Speak for Themselves, about getting into specifics about the trading so people understand what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
On or around August 6, 2001, what appear to be, quote, suspicious, end quote, put option purchases are made. According to one analyst, quote, from what I'm hearing, it's more than coincidence, end quote. In early September 2001, quote, suspicious, end quote, short selling of reinsurance company stocks take place. Also in September 2001, suspicion of insider trading takes place in many other countries, resulting in the creation of several investigations. The countries mentioned are Belgium, France, Switzerland, Luxembourg, Monte Carlo, Cyprus, the UK, Italy, and Japan. On October 3rd, 2001, the San Francisco Chronicle will report that the NYSE sees, quote, unusually heavy trading in airline and related stocks several days before the attacks, end quote. Some of those companies are American, Continental, Delta, Northwest, Southwest, United, and U.S. Airways. In early September 2001, there is a sharp increase in short selling of American and United Airlines stocks. And the next part is the most compelling, I think. Between September 6, 2001 and September 10, 2001, suspicious trading of put options of American and United Airlines occur. Ernst, and forgive me if I say this name wrong, Ernst Welteke, the president of a German central bank, says that his bank has done a study. Quote, there are ever clearer signs that there were activities on international financial markets that have been carried out with the necessary expert knowledge, end quote. His researchers have found, quote, almost irrefutable proof of insider trading, end quote. So that's the basic gist of the examples of what might have taken place prior to 9/11. And if somebody did insider trading, that means that they had a knowledge that the 9/11 attacks might have been on their way. So, my next question is, are you aware of the software known as Promise?
Yes, I am, and it's related to the topic we're talking about. By way of background, in finance courses, the students are taught something called the efficient market hypothesis, where one thing that financial economics tries to teach students is the fact that you've got to respect market prices. And it's hard to beat the market. It's hard to be smarter than the market for the same reason that, when you and I go out of our houses and walk down the sidewalk, we don't see a lot of $20 bills on the sidewalk. And the simple reason is if they were there, someone would have picked them up. And the same type of phenomenon happens in financial markets, which are so competitive. And market information that is relevant for market prices tends to flow into market prices rapidly. If it didn't, then there would still be $20 bills on the floor that people would be picking up. And that's why market prices are worthy of respect and inquiry on a matter like this, because the information certainly appears to be consistent with the fact that there was information flowing about the attacks beforehand, and the markets were acting on it. And that's why this Promise system, that's why the intelligence agencies, in theory, are monitoring market prices for threats and threats of war and threats of terrorism through the financial markets, because they're so efficient and information flows into them about everything, including apparently before 9/11.
Okay, well, what I've done is I've gotten a description of just exactly what Promise is for everyone. Promise is PROMIS, and it stands for Prosecutors Management Information System. Designed as a case management system for prosecutors, Promise has the ability to track people. Quote, every use of Promise in the court system is tracking people, said Inslaw President Hamilton. Quote, you can rotate the file by case, defendant, arresting officer, judge, defense lawyer, and it's tracking all the names of all the people in all the cases, end quote. What this means is that Promise can provide a complete rundown of all federal cases in which a lawyer has been involved, or all the cases in which a lawyer has represented defendant A, or all the cases in which a lawyer has represented white-collar criminals, at which stage in each of the cases the lawyer agreed to a plea bargain, and so on. Based on this information, Promise can help a prosecutor determine when a plea will be taken in a particular type of case. But the real power of promise, according to Hamilton, is that with its staggering 570,000 lines of computer code, Promise can integrate innumerable databases without requiring any reprogramming. In essence, Promise can turn blind data into information. And anyone in government will tell you that information, when wielded with finesse, begets power. Converted to use by intelligence agencies, as has been alleged in interviews by ex-CIA and Israeli Mossad agents, Promise can be a powerful tracking device capable of monitoring intelligence operations, agents and targets instead of legal cases, end quote. All of that is from an article from Wired magazine called The Inslaw Octopus from 1993. Now, with regards to trading financial transactions and so forth, I got this little quote from Salon, and we're going to get to why Promise is significant in a second. Quote, according to reports over the years in the U.S. and foreign press, Inslaw's Promise software has embedded surreptitiously in systems sold to foreign and global banks as a way to give the NSA secret, quote, backdoor, end quote, access to the electronic flow of money around the world. Mm-hmm. It says William Hamilton claims that Reagan officials gave Promise to the NSA and the CIA, which then adapted the software and its outstanding ability to search other databases to manage intelligence operations and track financial transactions. And that's from a Salon piece called Exposing Bush's Historic Abuse of Power from July 24th, 2008. Now, the reason that I brought up Promise is because Promise, as it says, looks at what the market is doing. It monitors stocks and so on and so forth, and for possible terrorist attacks and stuff like that.
And money flows. That's
money flows.
Key. Yep.
Now, the 9/11 family members asked, I believe, the Joint Congressional Inquiry and the 9/11 Commission about this, and I have some quotes about it. Quote, also ignored by U.S. intelligence agencies was the enormous amount of trading activity on the Chicago Exchange Board and in overseas markets. Our intelligence agencies readily use Promise software to analyze these kinds of market indicators that presented themselves in the weeks prior to September 11th. Why were these aberrational trades and market swings ignored? We were at the highest state of alert. An attack by Al-Qaeda was expected to occur at any given moment, and yet massive amounts of trades occurred on American Airlines, United Airlines, reinsurance companies, and leaseholders in the World Trade Center, and none of our watchdogs noticed, end quote. And that was from 9/11 family member Kristen Brotweiser, I believe in front of the Joint Congressional Inquiry on September 18th, 2002. The next thing I have is from a press release from the 9/11 Family Steering Committee. It says, quote, why did our government fail its foremost obligation to protect its citizens on 9/11? All other questions stem from that. There are questions about domestic and foreign intelligence, INS, NSC, NSA, FAA, NORAD, stock puts, and Promise software. There are also questions about the influence of non-government entities on our government's foreign and domestic policies. No government official or agency should be exempt from questions about what they knew or did prior to or on September 11th, end quote. And that is from a statement from the Family Steering Committee press conference remarks on September 10th, 2003. Now, I want to make the point That promise is not addressed at all that I can see by the 9/11 Commission or the Joint Congressional Inquiry into 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
So
it would seem if you've developed this amazing system for tracking criminal and or warlike activity, where is the evidence that we've actually used this incredible system? And the fact it's like the dog that didn't bark. It's, wait a minute, something is fishy. It's just by the absence of information. Perhaps, to think things out here, the possibility exists that they don't want to talk about how they use it because they want to protect the sources and methods of investigation. But
well, to me, everything that the 9/11 Commission ignored becomes a topic of interest, in my opinion, as well as a number of other things. But, this is what the 9/11 Commission said with regards to the insider trading.
Mm-hmm. You have the quote there? It's kind of in my head, but you can go ahead and read it.
I have the quote right in front of me.
Good.
It says, highly publicized allegations of insider trading in advance of 9/11 generally rest on reports of unusual pre-9/11 trading activity in companies whose stock plummeted after the attacks. Some unusual trading did in fact occur, but each such trade proved to have an innocuous explanation. For example, the volume of put options investments that pay off only when a stock drops in price surged in the parent companies of United Airlines on September 6th and American Airlines on September 10th. Highly suspicious trading on its face, yet further investigation has revealed that the trading had no connection with
connection or no conceivable ties to Al Qaeda. I'm sorry for interrupting. Go ahead. I recall that language.
It says a single U.S.-based institutional investor with no conceivable ties to Al Qaeda purchased 95% of the UAL puts on September 6th as part of a trading strategy that also included buying 115,000 shares of American on September 10th. Similarly, much of the seemingly suspicious trading in American on September 10th was traced to a specific U.S.-based options trading newsletter faxed to its subscribers on Sunday, September 9th, which recommended these trades. These examples typify the evidence examined by the investigation. The SEC and the FBI, aided by other agencies and the securities industry, devoted enormous resources to investigating this issue, including securing the cooperation of many foreign governments. These investigators have found that the apparently suspicious consistently proved innocuous. Now, they said that the one person they looked at or whatever had no ties to Al Qaeda. The 9/11 Commission would not reveal the name of the, quote, single U.S.-based institutional investor that had no conceivable ties to Al Qaeda, which is interesting. So the 9/11 Commission is saying that it did not take place and that not even Al Qaeda took part in the trading. Now,
the obvious question is, did they investigate the possibility, if information was flowing, as we've learned a great deal more about the warnings that were flowering in July and August, whether or not that information was acted on by anybody that had access to it, including the intelligence agencies and anyone they spoke with.
Well,
the 9/11 Commission doesn't. The 9/11 Commission report does not investigate that question.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, there was a very surprising quote from Ernst Welteke, and the 9/11 Commission addressed what he had to say in a monograph called the 9/11 Commission Monograph on Terrorist Financing, and I'll just read what they say.
Mm-hmm.
It says, quote, shortly after 9/11, Ernst Welteke, president of the German Central Bank, made a number of public statements that insider trading occurred in airline and insurance company stock and also in gold and oil futures. These preliminary claims were never confirmed. In fact, German officials publicly backtracked fairly soon after Mr. Weltke's statement was issued. On September 27th, a spokesman for the German security regulator, BAWE, declared that while the investigation was continuing, quote, there is no evidence that anyone who had knowledge of the attacks before they were committed used it to make financial transactions, end quote. On December 3rd, 2001, a spokesman for the BAWE said its investigation had revealed no evidence of illicit trading in advance of 9/11 and that the case remained open pending new information. The spokesman said separate investigations by state authorities had also yielded no information and had been closed. The last part says, Commission staff interviewed German law enforcement officials who said that exhaustive investigation in Germany revealed no evidence of illicit trading. Moreover, both SEC and FBI officials involved in the trading investigation told the Commission staff that German investigators had privately communicated to them that there was no evidence of illicit trading in Germany before 9/11. The FBI legal attaché in Berlin forwarded a lead to the German BKA, which reported back that the trading allegations lacked merit. It appears then that Weltke's initial comments were simply ill-considered and unsupported by the evidence, end quote. Now, I can find no evidence that the 9/11 Commission spoke with Ernst Weltke to see what he had to say, to look at the information that he had. I mean, apparently his bank did a study. It said so. And it said that there are ever clearer signs that there were activities on international financial markets that must have been carried out with the necessary expert knowledge, meaning that they knew the attacks were coming and used that information to make money. His researchers found, quote, almost irrefutable proof of insider trading. So that's the story of Ernst Weltke. Now, on my show, we've gone over how corrupt and compromised the 9/11 Commission was. So basically, their assertions have to be taken with a grain of salt.
In addition, these assertions in this area are also consistent with the quote that you're also very well aware of on page 172 regarding the financing and the source of the funding for the attack, where
right.
The 9/11 Commission states that this is, at the end of the day, we don't know, and it doesn't really matter. It's of little practical significance. Al-Qaeda had many sources of funding, and they could have tapped any one of them. It's if they didn't try to follow the money trail, which in turn relates very, I think, closely to this recent developments regarding a court case in a FOIA lawsuit in Sarasota, Florida, and Senator Graham's active support of the questions that have been raised and his anger with the integrity of the FBI, apparently in its relationships with both the Congress and the 9/11 Commission, regarding this family that was living in Sarasota, Florida, that had the father of the woman living there was a senior advisor to the Saudi royal family, and they left everything behind in the week or two before 9/11, including, quote, an empty safe, unquote, which in turn, Senator Graham is angry that the FBI withheld evidence that it knew about this family, including evidence that it had that the alleged hijackers were visiting the house in the weeks before 9/11, which is a shocking statement by the former chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee and co-chair of the Joint Congressional Inquiry. He's mad that this hasn't been, and this FOIA lawsuit that's been led by the Florida Bulldog and a great guy there named Dan Christensen has succeeded in getting 80,000 pages of documents that the FBI originally denied existed into the hands of a federal judge who was reviewing them for possible release regarding to the investigation of this family. And if in fact this was part of the support for the hijackers, including financial support, that's part of the realm of interest on these asserted for the 9/11, the 28 pages that have been forever declassified, at least so far, forever classified originally by the Bush administration, and the Obama administration has refused to release them. So that things are still active, both in the Congress and as well as in this FOIA lawsuit in Sarasota.
Well,
anybody that was supporting the hijackers financially, as well as related networks, they had to be doing it with dollar-denominated accounts in the United States or outside the United States, and in turn, anyone that was in those accounts that knew something was coming may have been liquefying their accounts before 9/11, and that could help explain perhaps some of that cash flow that I was asking questions about.
Well, I wanted to go over what the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, found with regards to the allegations of insider trading. Now, this is a report. It says, quote, "Nearly 9 years, 2 recessions, and thousands of conspiracy theories later, the U.S. government has made it official. Initial speculation after the 9/11 terrorist attacks that plotters made financial bets against airlines or other companies hurt by the events was unfounded. The Securities and Exchange Commission began its inquiry into the matter on September 12, 2001, and went on to examine trading in the U.S. and foreign securities markets that took place between August 20th of that year and September 11th. While the agency wrapped up its investigations in May 2002, and there were references to the SEC's conclusions in the report by the Federal 9/11 Commission, the findings were kept secret. But the privately operated, nonpartisan National Security Archives fought for 6 years to make the SEC report public, an effort aided by the Obama administration's push to declassify documents across the spectrum of government affairs. And today, most of the SEC's, quote, pre-September 11th, 2001 trading review was made public. And that was AOL News, in the article was called SEC Found No Sign, 9/11 Conspirators Traded on Plot, and that was April 30th, 2010.
So that wasn't an SEC report. It was a report about the SEC's investigation. I mean, it
was a report
Yep.
that said their findings were finally released, essentially. And
the U.S. government has made it official. It's a broad claim already. That's a little bit suspicious.
Right.
I have some other, there's some source of perspective for you. I don't have the authors' names on my fingertips, but there was a study an academic paper, a research paper by accounting and finance professors. I believe one of them was from Emory University in Georgia that examined the trading success of SEC employees.
Well, there was. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
SEC employees apparently have good records of trading success around the times of SEC enforcement action was the area that they were looking at, and that's maybe just another little nugget to be thinking about.
Well, one thing I find interesting is that they're looking to see if terrorists, quote unquote, used their information about the attacks to make money. They're not looking. It doesn't seem that they're looking anywhere else. Like, who else?
They don't want to find the possible answer, which is so possibly shocking and sad. That we don't want to go there. Thanks anyway, and don't rock the boat. That's the implication.
I found 2 stories that show that the SEC might be corrupt, as a matter of fact. Can you believe that? A government agency that's corrupt?
I live in Chicago, John.
That's where Al Capone came from.
And some other folks, but a longer story.
Right. All right, so these quotes that I have, it says, quote, "A trial attorney from the Securities and Exchange Commission said his bosses were too tentative and fearful to bring many Wall Street leaders to heel after the 2008 credit crisis, echoing the regulators' outside critics. James Kidney, who joined the SEC in 1986 and retired this month, offered the critique in a speech at his goodbye party. His remarks hit home with many in the crowd of SEC lawyers and alumni, thanks to a part of this resume not publicly known, or a part of his resume not publicly known. He had campaigned internally to bring charges against more executives in the agency's 2010 case against Goldman Sachs Group Incorporated. The SEC has become, quote, an agency that polices the broken windows on the street level and rarely goes to the penthouse floors, end quote, Kidney said, according to a copy of his remarks obtained by Bloomberg News. Quote, on the rare occasions when enforcement does go to the penthouse, good manners are paramount. Tough enforcement, risky enforcement is subject to extensive negotiations and weakening, end quote. And that was from Bloomberg, an article called SEC Goldman Lawyer Says Agency Too Timid on Wall Street Misdeeds from April 8th, 2014. And the second quote I have says, quote, the SEC has violated federal law by destroying the records of thousands of enforcement cases in which it decided not to file charges against or conduct full-blown investigations of Wall Street firms and others initially suspected of wrongdoing, a former agency official has alleged. The purged records involve major firms such as Goldman Sachs, Citigroup, Bank of America, Morgan Stanley, and hedge fund manager SAC Capital, the former official claim. At issue were suspicions of actions such as insider trading, financial fraud, and market manipulation. The allegations come at a time when the Securities and Exchange Commission faces criticism that it has pulled punches or missed warning signs in its policing of Wall Street. That's from the Washington Post. It's called SEC Accused of Dumping Records from November 17th, 2001. The person who wrote that story, the originator of that article, was Matt Taibbi, and his article was called, quote, is the SEC covering up Wall Street crimes, end quote, and that appeared in Rolling Stone magazine. Now, I spoke to Matt Taibbi about the story of the SEC. I asked him, the originator of the SEC corruption story, if we should trust the SEC's conclusions concerning the suspicious trading of 9/11. Do you want to know what he said?
I would just guess, but go ahead. Yes, I do want to know what he said.
It says, quote, the whole notion that U.S. interests would have insider traded 9/11 is the dumbest thing you people ever thought up, or have ever thought up, and that's saying quite a lot. Have you even stopped for a second to think about this rationality? Any person that would be in a position to know about the 9/11 attacks from within the U.S. government would also have access to mountains of other vital economic information, like changes in interest rates, information about military contract awards, or the results of USDA or CBO or Bureau of Labor reports. It is exponentially easier to trade on interest rate shifts or unemployment statistics than it is to short the freaking airline you're going to use in a terrorist attack. And doing so has an additional benefit of not leaving physical evidence tying you to the crime. In fact, if in fact anyone did insider trade 9/11, that to me would be proof that it had to be Arab terrorists or somebody similarly unsophisticated, because nobody with the wherewithal to pull off a, quote, inside job on the scale you folks, us, believe would bother trying to steal a few nickels in such a crude, silly way. That's like accusing a man who's just robbed 3 Rembrandts from the Met of ripping the head off a parking meter with a wrench on the way home. The fact that you believe this stuff, to me, indicates that you have no idea at all how the financial services industry works. There are a million easier ways for people in that position to make money. So that was his response. Mm-hmm. And I responded by saying, quote, we thought it up. Obviously, you didn't pay attention to the news regarding the allegations of insider trading, nor did you pay attention to the fact that when the families asked the FBI about it, they were essentially ignored. So I got it. We should trust the FCC, is what you're saying.
Well, one thing that the implication of his response, that he leaves the implication that I don't know what you think, John, but I don't know if there was insider trading before 9/11. I just do know that it's very suspicious that we don't have a credible investigation of this possibility. And that's
absolutely.
The open questions. That's what the fact that these questions are still open is a scandal enough.
Absolutely. And just to counter what Matt said, I found this report, and I know this is a lot of information for people to take in, but this is an important subject, so I wanted to try to get as much as I could out there. This is from an article, quote, with the U.S. puppet back in the president's mansion, UFC's, I think that's United Fruit Company, UFC's profits
perhaps,
were safe. But it appears the company wasn't the only beneficiary of this Cold War cloak and dagger diplomacy. A recent study by economists Aaron Dragic Dubé, Ethan Kaplan, and Suresh Naidu argues that those in on the planning process also profited handsomely. By tracking the stock prices of UFC and other politically vulnerable firms in the months leading up to the CIA staged coup in Guatemala, Chile, Cuba, and Iran, the researchers provide evidence that someone, perhaps one of the Dulles, Cabos, or others in the know, was trading stocks based on classified information of these coups in the making. That is from Slate.com, from an article called They Made a Killing from October 2008.
Mm-hmm.
So...
Well, there's an interesting, it's not just, for instance, this intelligence gathering that you're talking about. There is also a very interesting area of the financial markets called political risk insurance, where private companies are insuring against the risk of loss for companies that have assets that might be nationalized in the event of a coup, or that might be, the banking system might be frozen by a country that's having a fiscal crisis. Or it's a fascinating area of insurance, and it's a valid market-based sort of solution for trying to manage your risks in a very risky world. And the incentives for those folks, it's valid for them to try to be aware of developing threats, because that's their job. They're insurance companies, and it's not evil. And so there's another part of the equation that the insurance companies that were exposed to 9/11 right now are very important plaintiffs in that New York litigation that is still proceeding and open for going after the financing of the attacks, perhaps, or asserted the financing of the attacks by people in Saudi Arabia.
Right. Well, I'd like to point out that we pointed out already, or I've pointed out, that the 9/11 Commission was corrupt and compromised. We have information that suggests the SEC is corrupt and compromised, and I provided an example of a study that was done that showed that people with inside knowledge of coups that were going to take place, prospered within the Wall Street. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to read a couple of names of reports that were done that show that there probably was insider trading, or suggest that there was. Alan M. Poteshman, The Unusual Option Market Activity and Terrorist Attacks of September 11, 2001. The Journal of Business, 2000, Volume 79, Number 4. And I think that study suggests that it might have been the terrorists that might have done the insider trading. I don't remember exactly.
He didn't identify the source of the trading. He didn't try to make that determination. He just examined mathematically the prices, and yes, it is consistent in his head with informed trading.
The second one is Mark Chesney et al., Detecting Informed Trading Activities in the Options Markets. Social Sciences Research Network, 13 January 2010. Do you know anything about that study?
I've heard about him, and I've heard good things about it. I haven't read his study, but I've heard about him.
Okay, the third one is Wing Qiang Wang et al. Was there abnormal trading in the S&P 500 index options prior to the September 11th attacks? And that was Social Sciences Research Network, April 2010. Do you know anything about that one?
No, but there's another, here's another, I haven't seen, if you see this on your radar, if you're looking around, there's another set of, for instance, it's not just airlines that we're talking about, or reinsurance companies, or, that's a very interesting avenue of exploration here that's worthy of looking into. But there's another possible indicator that there's something called the VIX index, which is a volatility index that's traded at the Chicago Board Options Exchange. And in the weeks before 9/11, it uses option prices to basically try to measure how much uncertainty, or in fact, the VIX index is sometimes called the market fear index. And it had some extraordinary movements in the 2 weeks before 9/11 as well. And I haven't seen a study of that yet. And I don't know if we could, it's like these other ones, we really, how conclusive we can be about the conclusions, especially with respect to who did the trading. It's hard to find the truth. But again, I guess that's the sad state of affairs, that we still have these open questions, and that's...
Yeah, absolutely. And the last thing I'm going to quote, James Ricard wrote a book called The Death of Money. And in that book, he alleged that insider trading did in fact take place. This book recently came out, but he argues that it was Al-Qaeda or terrorists that did it. But here's a quote from his book. Quote, "The secure meeting rooms at the CIA's Langley headquarters, windowless, quiet, and cramped, are called vaults by those who use them. On September 26, 2003, John Mulherin and I were seated side by side in a fourth-floor vault in the headquarters complex. Mulherin was one of the most legendary stock traders in Wall Street history. I was responsible for modeling terrorist trading for the CIA, part of a broad inquiry into stock trading on advanced knowledge of the 9/11 attacks. I looked in his eyes, and I asked if he believed there was insider trading in American Airlines stock immediately prior to 9/11. His answer was chilling. Quote, "It was the most blatant case of insider trading I've ever seen," end quote. So, obviously there are contradictions to what the SEC and the 9/11 Commission are saying. Now, I think I have a question for you. Okay, is there anything else that you would like to promote at this time?
Well, in the subject area that we're talking about, if anything, I'd like to promote, just because it's a worthy effort, is that 28pages.org website, or not promote it, but just note it and look at the effort that's being put forth by the folks behind that website, and the work of the Florida Bulldog, parenthetically, on and their case in Sarasota. Those are two efforts right now that they aren't going to be conclusive, and as you've noted, the 28 pages, even if we get them, are they the end of the story? And they're not, but that doesn't mean that they're not useful. And declassifying those 28 pages is going to be important for getting an authoritative investigation underway. We need a new subpoena-powered investigation, including an investigation, I'm sad to say, into previous investigations.
Well, I wholeheartedly agree with that. One of the interesting things, and I've said this before about the 28 redacted pages, is that the 9/11 Commission apparently looked into the allegations of the 28 redacted pages, allegations which Philip Zelikow, the executive director of the 9/11 Commission, recently referred to as, quote, wild accusations. The 9/11 report looked into the allegations and absolved Saudi Arabia. Now, a short note about that. Philip Zelikow refused half of the interview requests for Saudi investigators. Dana Lieseman, who came from the Joint Congressional Inquiry and helped to author the 28 redacted pages, was denied access to them by Philip Zelikow. Because of that, she went through a back channel to gain access to those pages, and as a result, Zelikow fired her. The memoranda for the record, which basically is a description of the interviews that took place with witnesses. There are different pages for each witness. They're called memoranda for the record. For three of the individuals, I don't remember the names, directly in the NFR, it says that these people are not trustworthy. The people they were talking to about the Saudi part of the plot. They weren't trustworthy, and yet Philip Zelikow and Dieter Snell took part in a, quote, late-night editing session to remove any Saudi support for the hijackers from the Saudi government, and they moved it into footnotes in the back of the book. So that's why the 9/11 report essentially absolved Saudi Arabia, because of Philip Zelikow and Dieter Snell. And I'd just like to say, Dieter Snell is somebody who was a witness in a courtroom trying to prove that Iran was responsible for 9/11. Because of his testimony, the court found that Iran was involved in 9/11. Also, I believe that he got his boss at one time, Elliot Spisser, who was his boss at one time, to get out of testifying before the Able Danger hearings that were taking place, because he was somebody who supposedly spoke to the Able Danger people, and yet Able Danger didn't show up in the 9/11 report. So that's a little bit more information for you guys. So this contradiction between the 9/11 report and the Joint Congressional Inquiry, I think, is very interesting, because it further shows to me how corrupt the 9/11 Commission was, which was sold to the world as the definitive account of 9/11. Anything to say about that?
I think we need a new investigation, and the question arises: where does it take place?
Right, exactly.
How do you trust whatever system is established to?
Well, I don't trust the government to do it. I don't know that I trust the United Nations to do it. I don't know about the International Criminal Court, which we don't adhere to anyway. So I would think it would have to be like a Jim Garrison kind of person to bring a case against whoever, wouldn't it?
It's possible. I don't want to give up completely, but it's possible someone in Congress could do the right thing, and the powers in the Congress legally can potentially be used. A good leader in Congress leading the way would be an effective tool. However, it's hard to find evidence to be confident that can happen.
Well, the last thing I have to say with regards to the insider trading, the alleged insider trading, if it was Al-Qaeda or a terrorist that took part in insider trading, the government would have been all over that. Instead, they did the opposite and said it didn't happen at all. So even though certain studies and individuals have shown, there is evidence to believe it did happen. And I have a quote from somebody: "Never believe anything until it has been officially denied," from Claude Cockburn, who was a British journalist.
And well, as sad as cynical as we can get about, it's also good to try to emphasize the fact that the world isn't completely black, and I'm hopeful that we have some leaders behind the scenes in the Congress and in the regulatory agencies that are taking the day down the road, and that's hopefully is something that's going to help us on finding the truth about the worst set of crimes in U.S. history.
Which is absolutely imperative for us, for the families, for the people of the world. Well, Bill, I want to thank you very much for your time today. Your insight has been very valuable into this whole situation. And is there anything you'd like to promote besides the 28 pages, or is that it?
That sounds like we're ready to go, I think. That's all I'll leave it with. Just the work of the 28 pages folks and this Florida Bulldog outfit are current opportunities for finding the truth. And those are things that I hope the judicial system respects and the Congress.
Well, thank you very much, Bill, for your time today, and you have a good night.
You too. Nice to talk to you, John.
Nice to talk to you, too.
The following is a clip from the documentary, In Their Own Words, The Untold Stories of the 9/11 Families.
If they were good questions, a lot of times we were told it had to do with national security, they couldn't tell us. So if it had to do with, it had to do with the Moussaoui trial, so they couldn't address the questions. And to get the standard polito-speak from every one of these meetings was frustrating. And inevitably, someone would start banging the table. Someone would raise their voice.
And I truly lost my temper. I just said, what is this crap that you're talking about? And we brought up the put options.
Federal officials have begun a major investigation into whether someone, or many people, benefited financially from the evil done to the country last Tuesday. Not long before the attacks occurred, there were some financial transactions in the stock market that may indicate knowledge of the attack before it began.
The week prior to 9/11, there were puts on the airlines. And it wasn't just all the airlines, it was on American and United, which meant you were betting that those airlines' stock prices would go down.
The trades are called puts, and they involved at least 450,000 shares of American. But what raised the red flag is more than 80% of the orders were puts, far outnumbering call options, those betting the stock would rise. Sources say they've never seen that kind of imbalance before. After the terrorist attacks, American Airlines stock price obviously did fall. According to our sources, that translated into well over $5 million total profit for the person or persons who bet the stock would fall.
One example, United Airlines. The Thursday before the attack, more than 2,000 contracts betting that the stock would go down were purchased, 90 times more in one day than in 3 weeks. When the markets reopened, United stock dropped. The price of the contracts soared, and someone may have made a lot of money fast. $180,000 turns into $2.4 million when that plane hits the World Trade Center.
Altogether, at least 7 countries are dissecting suspicious trades that may have netted more than $100 million in profits.
And there's much more, including an extraordinarily high number of bets against Morgan Stanley and Marsh & McLennan, 2 of the World Trade Center's biggest tenants. Merrill Lynch was involved, and I said, Merrill Lynch's stock was 48 the day before 9/11, and I said the next day it was down to 41. This is kind of fishy. I said, suddenly, you have these 2 major airlines, and their stock go down, they go down tremendously, and somebody's making lots of money off of 9/11.
And the answer that we got was, we've investigated and we find no unusual trading activity.
Could this be a coincidence? This would be one of the most extraordinary coincidences in the history of mankind if it was a coincidence.
It is absolutely unprecedented to see cases of insider trading covering the entire world, from Japan, the United States, and North America to Europe.
So we said, well, you know what? What would make me feel better is tell the story.
Can you follow up on that? Can you tell us, can you be more specific? Can you pull up the trades? Can you, show us what really happened?
Who did those trades? Based on what research did they have that just those 2 airlines? And where is the money? And did it get dispersed?
Investigators now believe that in this climate, even the most secretive banks will hand over information to expose the most devious kind of insider trading. Sources say U.S. investigators are making headway in tracking down suspicious stock trades made just before the attacks.
We can directly work backwards from the trade on the floor of the Chicago Board's Option Exchange. That trader is linked to a brokerage firm. That brokerage firm received the order to buy that put option from either someone within their own brokerage firm speculating, or from one of their customers.
Do we know who performed those trades? Yes. Can we have that information? No.
And he said, well, this is disinformation. I said, what are you talking about, disinformation? We know this happened. And then he dropped it and just drops it, just like that.
Well, you're asking me to go on faith that, that's the truth. Hard to go on faith when I feel that I've been failed and not told the truth.
They weren't really forthcoming and truthful with us. And you'd leave there as frustrated as you left every other meeting. And, this was meeting after meeting. It didn't matter with who.